Hello fellow modelers, in today's video I'll be showing you how I painted and weathered my 1/72 scale Panzerkampfwagen IV Ausf.H. Before painting the paint scheme that I have chosen, I first primed my model in an even coat of black primer. It's important to paint the primer in an even coat all around the model so that if we miss painting a small crack later on, at least you won't have the color of bare plastic, and instead a color that looks like a shading effect. Now I went ahead and disassembled the model so that I could paint each part individually. The rubber tracks in this kit were pretty tight and quite frustrating to put on and take off. However, I did like the detail on the track links facing outwards, but the track links facing inwards had no detail. The Dragon kit does not come with individual track links, so I had to stick to them whether I liked them or not. To paint some smaller pieces, I used that same paint mixture directly from my airbrush and painted it onto the piece using a brush. I did the same thing for the wheels on the tracks. Another method of painting the tracks is by airbrushing it. However, this method does also have its disadvantages. As you can see from my two examples here, the result is quite messy. Next, I used Dunkelgelb Shine to highlight the raised details and to make the model look more interesting. I went along and directly used the paint from the bottle and didn't even bother to thin it out. And here's the result. And now is the time to paint the camo. From the back of the box in which the model came from, there is a painting guide which shows you how it should roughly look. I followed the scheme a little, but mostly went for random lines. Note that the painting scheme required the lower hole to remain in Dunkelgelb color. So, all I had to do was cover the lower hole with masking tape to prevent color from getting onto it. For the green color, I will be using RAL 6003 Olive Brune Opt 2. And I'll mix it with a little bit of RAL 6011 Rosette Grun to make the color look a little bit more lighter. For the brown color, I'll be using RAL 8017 Choco Brown. If you are like me and your airbrushing skills aren't master level, you can fill in some of your mistakes by painting them, except with a brush this time. The next step was decal application. All I needed to do was to decide which marking scheme I wanted to use, and then cut out the decals. Because these are water slide decals, I can simply soak the decals in water to activate the decal. Application of the decal is easy and straightforward. All you need to do is remove the decal from the water and then slide it onto the place you want to have the decal. Remove excess water, the cotton swab. I'll also be using MIG's Decal Set and Decal Fix. This is a two-step process to stick on your decal. Repeatedly apply the decal set every time it gets dry until the decal is firmly in place. Step 2, which is Decal Fix, will help thin down your decal. Try your best to remove all the liquid from underneath the decal. Decal Fix, as said before, will help make your decal thinner. Apply it 3 or 4 times in a row every time it gets dry. After that, I apply some matte varnish onto the model with a paintbrush to seal in all the work we've done. Time for weathering. For the wash, I used a mixture of 3 oil paints, namely red, brown, and black. Using MIG's odorless enamel thinner, I thinned the paint to a wash-like consistency, at the same time mixing the color that I wanted for the wash. I added the wash to the details as to make them pop. Using a cotton swab slightly dampened in the same thinner, I wiped away the excess wash. Then, using that same wash but a little bit more thicker, I applied it to the details once again, this time to create a fake shadow. Moving on to chipping. For the first layer, I'll be using Decal Highlight. This time, I use a paint to thinner ratio of 1 part paint and 2 parts thinner. Using a paintbrush and a toothpick, I sprinkle on some dots to create a chipping effect. If any of the dots were too big, I would just clean them off with the cotton swab. the next step in chipping, I used that same paint mixture I used last time, but this time I applied it on with a sponge. And here's the result. And for the third step in chipping, I used that same paint mixture and this time a really fine tip paintbrush to apply it on manually. And here's the result. And that's all for chipping with Dunkelgelb. For the fourth step, I'll be using MIG's chipping paint and acrylic thinner to paint the exposed steel. This was the last step in chipping, and I used the paintbrush to apply it on. It was then time for streaking effects. I used MIG's streaking rust effects and applied it onto the places I chipped to make the chipping look a little bit more realistic. I toned down the effect with thinner just in case it was too strong. And after applying the streaking effects paint, I took a dampened brush and brushed the paint in a downwards motion to really get that streaking effect. Here is the result. It was then time for the mud effects. I used MIG's mud effects for dioramas. I would recommend other modelers not to use this mud on small models because it contains pretty large grains of sand. You can see the result later on. I applied the mud using a small and stiff brush. You can place the mud basically anywhere on the lower hull. However, do take into consideration where mud would actually collect. Because the color of the mud was not what I was looking for, all I had to do to change it was to use oil paints. In this case, I used a mixture of black, brown, orange, and white, thinning the mixture with odorless enamel thinner. To reduce waste and cut costs, I reused a plastic spoon as my palette. The color I was looking for was the color of wet mud. Apply this paint on places you believe mud will still be wet. After that, I used European earth pigment to mimic dirt that dried up over time. Dried dirt is usually located in the thinner parts of mud, in this case, the inner area. And here is the nice and dirty effect. Reapplying the paint for wet mud will help us enhance the color depth. And here's the cool result. You can call the lower hull finished by this point. However, I'm going to take another step forward and use engine grime and wet effects to enhance the weathering. Moving on to painting the tracks, I painted the rubber tires around the wheels using matte black. Now that the tracks were done with painting, I moved on to weathering them. I've already weathered one side, and I'll show you how to do that right now. The materials I used were Europe earth pigment and enamel thinner. First thing to do was to generously blot the pigment onto the track. Next, I wet the track using thinner. If there wasn't enough pigment, I just added some more. However, do note that the result after drying will look much more stronger. And here is the result. It's not too bad. After that, I took some gunmetal pigment and rubbed it around the tracks. Remember to keep this effect random. You don't want the whole track to be covered. This effect just highlights some of the track detail. Now on to painting the exhaust. Before applying the paint though, it's best to have something that you can hold on to. I simply superglued a toothpick onto the back of the exhaust. The first paint I'll be using is chipping paint, thinned down with the same amount of thinner. Holding the exhaust on a stick, I painted the chipping paint all over the exhaust. This will act as a base coat for all our upcoming steps. Next, using a fine brush, I painted some Dunkelgelb base onto the edges of the exhaust. Afterwards, you can make this effect look even more like chip paint by chipping off some of the paint with a toothpick. After that, I applied some medium rust pigment all over the exhaust. Then I applied some streaking rust effects, also all over the exhaust. The last rust pigment I used was light rust. This should be applied in random places indicating new rust. And here is the result. The final step of weathering were dust effects. I used a mixture of European earth pigment and enamel thinner and applied it to places where dust and dirt would accumulate. This is the result after drying, but not the final result yet. Using a stiff brush, I brushed away the excess pigments. So that's all I have for today. If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing to my YouTube channel and/or leave a comment. Till next time, keep modeling. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.